Hello, I'm Mr. Wilkinson and this is Biological. And we're going to start today with an introduction to biology. So, how I plan on doing this course is that you'll have some paper on the side. You can do this in a notebook, you can do it on scratch paper, but you should write everything that I write down. And we're going to cover all of the basic topics of biology that you would typically see in a high school biology course. I've been teaching biology for 10 years and I've covered the honors level biology. So this course is going to cover basically what you would see in an honors level biology classroom. So this is for students who are college bound and want to go to college, or maybe are starting at a college level and they find that the basic biology course that they're in has been a little bit difficult. So we'll start with the basics. What is biology? So biology, we can break this word down into two different sections. Bio, meaning life, and ology comes from the word logos, which means idea. And so we're talking in science, what we really mean is the study of. The study of. The study of anything, right? So anytime we see biology, right, sociology, biology, any of those kinds of things, we're talking about the study of something because we're talking about the words. And in biology in particular, the words are really, really important. Vocabulary is super important for biology. But you might be wondering, well, what is life? This is a really kind of a strange thing. You could probably think of a lot of things that are living or biotic, right? We could think of like a bird is a living thing, a human, they're alive, snail, plant. There's lots of different things that are living. But not only are living things, also things that come from living things would be considered biotic. So a feather from a bird, hair from a human, the shell from a snail, the leaf from a plant would all be considered biotic as well because they came from a living thing. Then there's another group of things called abiotic. And these are not considered living. Temperature. Light. Air. These kinds of things aren't considered alive. They've never been living, and they still influence living things, right? We need temperature, right? We need a certain level of heat to stay alive. We need light to see. We need air to breathe. And so living things still interact with these abiotic things around us. And so if we look at them together, the biotic things and the abiotic things are never really separate, but it's good to have an idea about these different things. Now, it's probably easy to identify what is alive and what is not, but it can be a little bit more tricky to define exactly what makes it to be a living thing and how is it able to do all this stuff. And the easiest way to do that biologists have got together, and created the characteristics of life. The characteristics of life. This is what we need to talk about here. And so we'll put a little box around that. We'll make this little banner here. If you look this up online, you'll find lots of different settings of characteristics of life. Some will have 6, some will have 7. There'll be a lot of different ways that we have categorized living things. But we all know that living things grow and change. They grow and change over time. You began life as a single cell, and now you're trillions of cells all working together to live. But even bacteria, a single-celled organism, still grows and changes over time. In addition to growing and changing over time, all living things reproduce. Now, this doesn't mean that if you haven't reproduced that you're not considered alive. We look at the population, so all of the organisms, if they can reproduce, then we consider them living. And humans can reproduce, and I'm going to assume that you are a human watching this. And because you're a human, we reproduce, you are considered a living thing. Not only do they reproduce, they pass on traits to their offspring. Pass on traits to offspring. You look like your parents. You're like, I look nothing like my parents. Well, wait a minute. You're not looking like a tree. You don't have branches. You've got 2 arms and 2 legs. You have 2 eyes. You have a head and a torso. And all of those things came from your parents. Now, you might look quite different from another human being, but compared to another human being, you look very similar to each other, much more so than you do the bacteria inside your gut, or the tree outside, or the bird in the air. You have lots of different things from those organisms. And that's what we're talking about. Those common characteristics of the species get passed down. But not only that, they evolve over time. You evolve. You are a little bit different from your parents, and they're a little bit different than their parents. Even though most of the traits they have get passed on to the next generation, there is a little bit of change. And that change over time can build up to create an entirely new species. We'll talk about that later. You also maintain the same state. You maintain homeostasis. You retain the same kind of internal state, the same temperature, the same pH levels inside your blood, the same amount of oxygen. All of these different parts of what it means to stay alive, you are constantly monitoring and keeping at the same level. You're keeping your same internal state different from the world around you. The world can get hotter or colder, but you maintain that same temperature. So that's what we mean when we say maintain homeostasis. You're keeping that same internal state. In order to do this, you are a bunch of chemicals, and you do a bunch of different chemical reactions inside of your body that allow you to maintain homeostasis. And we call all these chemical reactions a metabolism. You have a metabolism that you are using to break down the food that you eat and use it for the energy to continue to live. This metabolism all takes place in the smallest individual unit of life, which is the cell. All living things are made of cells. All made of cells. And so when we have all of these things together, we have life. Living things grow and change, reproduce, pass down traits to their offspring, evolve, maintain homeostasis, have a complex metabolism, and are made of cells. That's the characteristics of life. When one thing has some of these, but not all of them. I mean, if you look at the sun, for instance, a star, they grow and change, and they do have a metabolism. There is chemical reactions going on inside the sun, but they don't really reproduce, and they don't pass on traits to their offspring. They don't evolve, and they're not made of cells. And so because they don't hit all of those things, we don't consider the sun to be a living organism. But what about viruses? You might have heard of these strange little things called viruses. They can infect your cells and make you sick. Are they considered alive? Well, they don't really grow and change, and they aren't made of cells by themselves, so they're not considered living by most biologists. However, there are some biologists that want to consider viruses to be living things. And they want to consider them living because of this. They evolve. Viruses do reproduce, and they do pass on traits to their offspring, which allows them to change over time and evolve. You might have heard about COVID and COVID-19 and then now Omicron and all these different variations of that virus, COVID. And it will continue to change as time goes on, as all viruses do. And because it has this particular property of evolving, of exhibiting what's called Darwinian evolution, meaning that they gain traits over time and become so different, their offspring become so different than their ancestors, the ones that came before them, we can't call them the same anymore. And because viruses can do this, they do change over time, some biologists want to consider viruses as living things, and how they would define it as anything exhibiting Darwinian evolution, this ability to change and become a new species after many generations. But most biologists still agree that you have to meet all of the characteristics of life. And because viruses aren't made of cells, and they don't have a metabolism, they cannot maintain homeostasis, and that they don't grow and change over time, viruses aren't considered living by most. So that's it for today. We've covered what does it mean to be alive. We talked about how bio means life, and ology means the study of. We talked about biotic things, or biotic factors, like birds and humans, snails and plants, and the things that they make are also considered biotic: feathers, hair, shells, leaves. And we've talked about abiotic things that are not considered alive, like temperature and light and air. We talked about the characteristics of life and how viruses aren't really considered to be alive, but if you want to be considered alive, you have to be able to do all of these things. All right, that's it for biological. What I'd like you to do now is take a moment and summarize the things that we talked about in your notes.